Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. So folks, today we have a Lexus RX with a noise. It is a wheel bearing noise, roaring noise as you drive. The more you speed, the higher the noise is. I'm going to show you how we're going to diagnose this, how we're going to change the bearing, and some tips, because this is the one model, the RX and the Highlander as well, that can be tricky diagnosing wheel bearings, because you'll be driving and there is like noise everywhere. So in this video, I'll show you the trick to diagnosing these accurately. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. If you are a returning subscriber, well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's get right into it. So you test drove the car, you heard the noise, front or back. Here's the best way to diagnose it. If you just spin it, you're gonna hear all kinds of noises from the differential, if you're in the front, from the transfer case. That is normal when the wheels are off the ground. So in case of a DIY, now we have it on a lift, if you're DIYing this, you're gonna want to lift both wheels on the same axle. So if you're diagnosing a real wheel bearing, lift both wheels off the ground. That way you can really do a quick comparison and you'll know immediately. Some people will use a stethoscope and all these methods. None of them really work because you have the differential will make a lot of noise when it's off the ground. Here's the best way. Put your hand on the spring, on the coil spring right here. That will resonate the sound a lot louder and you will be able to feel it immediately. So I'm going to put my hand here, I'm going to spin the wheel. I can feel that roughness in the spring. Let's go to the other side and let's kind of feel it. You can hear this one. This one's really bad, but when you don't have one that's this bad, you're going to focus your feeling right in your arm. You're going to feel that grumbling feeling. But when you go to the other side, you spin the wheel, I feel nothing. I hear the sound. It almost sounds exactly like the other side. But when I spin it, I feel nothing here. This is the best way to diagnose wheel bearings. And you could do the same in the front. We're just gonna... And in the front, same thing. Put your hand here, spin it. I feel nothing. I hear all kinds of noises from that transfer case that are transferring, but I feel nothing in the spring. And the same for the last wheel, the right front wheel. I feel nothing here. That's the best way to diagnose these, folks. Otherwise, you're gonna be spinning your wheels, if you would, replacing wrong bearings, and it's only the one that is bad. This is super common on the RX and the Highlander, pretty much all years Highlander. For some reason, you drive them, you feel the noise everywhere. And you can apply this to many other models, but these two models are tricky to diagnose. Like you can do this on a Camry, Corolla, anything, but those are a lot easier to find which one it is. But on these, it's harder. But now, let's go take that wheel apart and let's take the wheel bearing out and I'll show you a few tricks to get them out when they're rusty. Let's take that wheel off. Now in order to get to these, we're gonna want to take the brakes, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's take the brakes off. Over here, brakes look really good. A little bit seized, and give them a good clean. Now this is an all-wheel drive model, so you have the axle going through here. Here's something you do with the axle nuts. These axle nuts are typically staked. You can unstake them and then they will ruin your thread and all this mess. Just replace the axle nuts. Usually they're rusty. I don't like them. And here's the trick to get them off. You use a cutoff wheel. We're just gonna weaken that area where the stake is, and then as soon as you turn it, it just breaks off and it doesn't affect the thread of the axle. Because the axle nut's very cheap. You damage the threads on the axle, we have bigger problems. You're gonna try to fix it. Now you're going to buy more tools, and potentially you won't be able to fix it. Now you have that down. Don't do that. Just weaken this area. Be very careful with the cutoff wheel. And for this one, we're wearing safety glasses because this will make a lot of racket. So let's do this. Just like that. This is good enough. You see how I cut into it here? This will weaken that area where the stake is. As soon as you turn it, it just breaks off. So let me take it off and I'll show you the axle nut. See how this broke off? This is what we want to arrive at. It's a very simple way. Yes, this is destroyed, but these are a few bucks. Just replace them and life is good. Now your axle is stuck to the bearing. We want to just break that spline off, and you can use a hammer. Do not use a metal hammer here. You could mushroom this and now you can't install your new nut. Either use a soft mallet, or if you have air, you're going to use an air hammer. That's it. Simple as that. Now we're going to remove the bolts that hold the bearing. On this particular model, they are this way. Some models will be in the back, but you basically find the openings in the hub. It's your socket. Now that you've gotten this loose, your axle is still loose. See the axle locked up again. I want to give it a quick tap. The axle is still loose. Some people will use pullers and the whole mess. Just take a hammer, hit it on the sides, comes right out. Now it's stuck to the backing plate. This is going to be hard to see, but you're going to take a flat chisel on an air hammer, put it right on the backing plate, comes right out. There's our bearing. Oh, this guy makes a lot of noise. Let's wait for the compressor to shut off and then you'll hear it. So here's the old bearing. You can hear that. I'm putting it next to the microphone. Let's look at our new one. This is the Toyota original. Folks, when it comes to bearings and aftermarket, if you're keeping this car for a year or two, you can go aftermarket. If you're keeping this car long, go originals. I mean, this is a 2004 RX330. This is the original wheel bearing on this car. That just goes to tell you how long the original one will last. That's a pretty long time. Whenever you do a wheel bearing, folks, and this is nothing against the awesome parts folks at the dealership, but you always want to check your part, just in case. There are so many iterations and so many versions, two-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive versus this has ABS, this doesn't. If you were talking about other models, always check your part, compare it to the old one. So this looks the same, I'm looking at it. The two-wheel drive models will not have the opening for the axle. This will be solid. Sometimes they will have slight variances in the bearings, like they change the design, and you will see it, but it'll bolt on and the bolt pattern will be the same. This bearing, nice and quiet. This one, not so nice and quiet. One thing I will say, you're a DIY mechanic, you don't have access to an air compressor, you don't have access to an air hammer, and you're wondering, well, how am I going to do this? Folks, all the air hammer does is basically takes a chisel or a punch and just hammers it. So you can do this by hand. So for example, popping the bearing off the backing plate, you're basically going to get your air hammer chisel right here on the backing plate, and you're going to hit it, it'll separate. If you don't have an air hammer, just use a chisel, put it there, have someone hold the whole thing, and just tap on it with a hammer. Same thing with popping the axle through. Get a punch, put it right in the center, tap on it, it'll go eventually. So this is how you're not going to buy all these fancy tools. When it comes to the cutoff wheel, you can use a Dremel tool. It'll take longer, yes, but we're trying to save money here by doing it ourselves. We're not going to go and invest in tools and compressor and all that. So these are some alternatives for you if you're doing this DIY. Let's go prep things there and then we'll install this bearing. You're going to want to clean the backing plate with some 80 grit sandpaper, just the area where the bearing goes. And then the same thing over here. This is harder with the axle in the way. Push the axle to the side. It'll just make your install a little bit easier. We're not going for a spit shine look because this will rust. As soon as you hit the first water, this will start rusting already. So don't get carried away with this. You just want to knock off the big chunks and that's good enough. And that's it. Sit your bearing back. Life is good. Now we're gonna get things lined up and ready for the new bearing. You're basically going to get your first bolt to line up the bearing with the backing plate, and then you're going to find and install your first bolt. Just start it so it'll hold everything together. Get your second bolt. You want to start all your 4 bolts by hand before you tighten any of them, because if you tighten it sideways, the other side won't line up anymore. See, now they're all lining up beautifully. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten this guy. Then we're going to put our new axle nut, which now, because the threads are not damaged, goes right in with by hand. Now we're going to stake the nut. This is a safety feature, so you can make sure this nut is locked in case it comes loose. I've never seen one come loose, but I've seen actually a lot come into the shop. Somebody did a bearing, forgot to stake it, and it's fine. But Toyota did this for a reason. We're going to do the same. You're just going to put a chisel right here. We're going to give it a few taps. That's it. That's staked. We're done. There's a special tool to do this. Folks, you don't need the special tool. This is where special tools kind of just make you look fancy. Just chisel it in till it's bent in, and we're done. Now we're going to reassemble our brakes, making sure, if you have one of these caps, that you line it up correctly. And this one is going to go right here. You want to make sure you install this hole is wide open, not obstructed by part of the bearing. There we go. This should sit flush. We're going to put our brakes back, and the caliper, and the wheel. And that is a wrap for this job. It's very simple, very DIY. Just one thing I will say about this kind of job, because I've been through this a lot and I want to give you a heads up. This is not a beginner job. Now you've seen this. This went very smoothly, very simple. I've done a lot of these, but there could be complications. Things like the bearing doesn't want to come off. You tap on it on the side, doesn't want to come off. You got to be patient with this job. You got to make sure you're working on a safe place. You don't want to just have one jack lift in the car and you're hammering on it. Jack stand, safety first, folks, and then take your time, take pictures. This is not difficult, but you could turn it into a difficult job if you're not kind of going in the specific order. Once you're done, make sure your backing plate's not hitting your rotor. Make sure everything is good. Go test drive it, double check things. Take your time, because this could seem simple, but if this wheel bearing comes off, you're going to have a major problem here. Do the job right, take pride in what you do, and this would turn into a simple job, saving you a little bit of labor. Granted, the part is the most expensive thing in this job. Labor is really not that high, but the bearings, Toyota bearings, are extremely expensive. And in the future, when I get one that is a press-on bearing, like the fronts in this car, this is just a bolt-on, the front are different. I will show you how to do that with a press. You do need a press for that one, but I'll show you how that is in the future. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.